Kids do well if they can. And what we can do as their parents is find the ways to help them show up doing well, however they can. We have to meet them where they are, and we have to be ready to see them where they are.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, the podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. I am here today with my colleague, my friend, my trainer, my mentee, all things, Melanie Sobocinski. So welcome, Melanie. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, Elaine.
It's lovely. So Melanie Melanie's a coach and a mom in our community, and has trained in the Sandy School modality and all things. And we were talking, I don't know, a few weeks ago, months ago now, who knows, about
Both.
Right? About this notion of transitions. And if you're a regular listener, you know, Diane and I talked about transitions earlier this year when we were talking about transition as a sleep, some of the challenges we have with going to sleep and waking up is actually a transition issue. And we talked a lot about it's actually a two-part series with, you know, how do you navigate sleep and some of the micromanagement issues. And today what we really want to talk about is the transition that happens when our kids transition from one kind of phase or stage of life to the next. And maybe it's from, you know, elementary school to middle school to high school to college, but it's those kind of macro transition points. You know, it even shows up when you go from school to break or from break back to school, right? But specifically when you're talking about milestones and life changes. And Melanie's done a lot of work on that with her kids, using this approach to help her navigate it. And so we thought it might be a really good conversation to have. So Melanie, thanks for your transparency and for being willing to share your adventure.
And thanks for inviting me, because it has been an adventure.
It is.
I expect it will continue to be an adventure.
It doesn't stop being an adventure. And we're very lucky that we've been doing this long enough where we've had this beautiful opportunity to have relationships with members of our community who have been in and out or in over a long period of time. So we've watched their kids grow up. I think your eldest was like 11 maybe when we started.
Both of my kids were in elementary school.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, when I started. And now I have one in college and one in high school.
Wow.
And that was the transition of last summer, is like, what are we doing to bridge from that one level to the next, from one building to the next, from one place to the next?
Right. Because it really, it's a full change of all aspects of location. So where do we start with this conversation? What do you think is really important for parents to understand about how to begin to approach this kind of macro transition issue that we're talking about?
Well, I think the first thing is to be mindful that it's coming and look for the little things that you can do now to make it easier in the long run.
So kind of intellectual level, I think most parents know it's coming. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid for it to come, or they don't think they're ready for it to come, or right. There's a lot of emotion around it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so practically when you say be aware that it's coming, what is it?
So it is whatever the big transition or the next big transition might be, or the next two, what you're lining up in a row. And the trick here, the big trick, is to notice what work do you as a parent, or myself as a parent, right? What do I have to do as a parent to level up to be ready to support my kid through this transition?
Wow. That's such a great concept. What do I have to do as a parent to level up to be ready to support my kid through this transition? So we keep thinking it's always about getting the kid ready, but there's this piece about getting us ready to be present for them. So speak about that a little bit.
Yeah. Like, what do I need to do as a parent to be ready to be the parent of college student instead of the parent of a high schooler? What do I need to do to be ready to be the parent of this kid at the high school level as opposed to that kid who's
Mhm.
already comfortable in high school?
So when you say level up to be ready, what might that look like? What does that really mean?
Well, for the first kid, I think it comes down to looking at your assumptions. Because I kept having these moments where, like, oh, I was that age, or my mom was such and such an age. But my kid is doing this in a different decade than I did.
Yeah.
And my kid is doing this in a different school system. And my kid is doing this in a different culture. And so just because I have a personal lens on what it is to make these transitions, what it is to encounter these different levels, I need to really set some of that aside. And so what is my kid experiencing, not how do I apply my ideas about high school to the current situation, which could be completely irrelevant. But we can, it's so easy to fall into that trap.
Hmm.
And then, you know, you and Diane talk about triggers a lot. That's where some of them come from, is that, oh, it's supposed to be this way. And suddenly you're playing a script that might have come from 3 generations back. Movies that happened in high school is like,
Right.
oh, like, no, those are, no.
Well, what I'm hearing is check your assumptions. So the
Yes.
first thing that we can do to prepare, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about, like, I've had a lot of I have 3 kids, now young adults. They've all left the house multiple times because, by the way, that happens, right? They leave and then they come back and then they leave again, but they come back in a different relationship with being at home, and then they leave and come back. And so I'm thinking back to the years of my own emotionality around it, right? Especially those years
Hmm.
when I was crying a lot at the beginning because I wasn't used to it, or the somersaults of the last one when I was excited for it. You know?
Hmm.
But so there's checking my assumptions, but also kind of what I hear you saying is checking in on your own emotional issues around it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just making space. And that could be like physical space or mental space or calendar space to be able to, have all the feels and do all the things and process whatever comes up around that, so that when your kids are ready to discuss like the transition or the next step or the whatever, that like you can be there for them instead of just getting sucked into whatever your own personal narrative is about what might be next.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting how much this ties into this conversation we have so often, but particularly with parenting teens and young adults, is how incredibly important it is to get our stuff out of the way so that
Mhm.
we can be present to them and their stuff. Because we've all got stuff, right? But when we let our emotions enter the fray, we're no longer really meeting them where they are and what they need. We're trying to manage our own stuff.
Exactly. It's like helping them pack for a trip by packing my own suitcase and like giving them my suitcase. That's not at all helpful.
No, but helping them pack by saying, "I believe you can do it," keeping myself out of the way of what I think they should bring, and then maybe offering a packing list or working with them to create a packing list, that would be helpful.
Or asking, I understand you have a trip. Is there something that you'd like me to do to help you get ready? Do you want some help with packing? When do you want me to check in again around whether you're making progress with packing or the college application or the high school orchestra audition or whatever it might happen to be?
Yeah. So as they become more independent, and that what we're really talking about is next level stages of independence.
Absolutely.
And we parents have a tendency to be afraid they're not going to be ready for it. So part of it is, managing our own stuff and getting our stuff out of the way.
Yes, self-managing that
Right.
to really see clearly where they are and what the next challenge is, but not just in one realm. It's
Say
like
more.
so it's real easy to get fixated on, oh, like we need to help them like micromanage the schoolwork so that they get it all done so they can get the grades, they can get into the college so that blah blah blah.
Right.
And it my college freshman needs to manage her bank account. She needs to manage her doctor's appointments and dentist appointments and whether she gets a flu shot. And she needs to, you know, when they turn 18, we can no longer just like call and make these things happen. If she lands in the hospital and I don't have the paperwork to say I'm actually allowed to step in and take this role,
Yeah.
like there's there are external like rules and regulations and things that happen when somebody turns 18 and it tends to be rare for people to really think about that and like what does my 18-year-old need in the way of legal? How do I teach my 18-year-old to start navigating the legal system in a way that's age appropriate for them? What do I want my kid to know about how they need to manage their own medical self? And to, scaffold it to where they are and then like, and this is the next step. And what help do you need? And do you want me to check in? And if so, how often?
So let's pause for a second and come back because I want to make this tangible for people. All right.
Hmm.
So we'll be back in just a second.
Do you recognize current ADHD interventions fall short? At Dig Coaching, we have developed a new field of engineering and a new ADHD intervention called Cognitive Ergonomics from the Inside Out. To learn more, visit cognitive-ergonomics.com.
Welcome back, everybody. My guest is Melanie Sebasensky, and we are talking about kind of macro transitions as our kids move from one life experience to another, and how to prepare for those transitions. And up until now, what I think we've really been talking about is managing our own assumptions, our own expectations, our own emotionality around it. And then some piece and making space for ourselves as adults to manage these transitions as our kids are going through them, we're feeling it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
we're transitioning from being full-time parents of whatever the level the kid was at to, especially if we're looking at parenting adults, part-time parents of fledglings who are
right?
trying their
Like
wing.
adults, yeah. So this brings us, and what I said, I want to make it a little more practical, tactical, because it can be overwhelming. And you're speaking specifically, the last example you were giving about making sure we have a medical proxy or capacity to support our kids
Mm-hmm.
from a legal perspective is really what happens when they leave from high school to college, for the most
Yes.
part, or when they turn 18, whether they're going to college or doing something else. And the language you used was you want to kind of help get them in an opportunity where they can practice.
Yes.
And that starts much earlier. So,
absolutely.
right. So
when they're 2 or 3.
Well, I'm going to look at elementary to middle school to high school, and high school to beyond. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just take a minute and say, okay, when kids are transitioning from elementary school to middle school, what are the appropriate things for we parents, besides checking our assumptions and setting appropriate expectations? Where might we be looking at that stage if you've got younger kids moving into more independence in middle school? What do we want to be aware of then?
So you have to look at your individual kid.
Okay.
because some kids are just going to sail through that, no questions asked. Other kids, you really do need to be, talking with the school about like what is the transition handoff from one school to the next to get the 504, the IEP to transfer over. What are accommodations that are appropriate at each level? And that is so particular to each kid.
Right. Indeed. But what is appropriate for most of our kids, I would say, is that there is something, if you haven't started including kids in that process by elementary
Yes.
school, then one of the things you really want to make sure you're doing by middle school is involving your kid in the process of understanding accommodations, even if they're not directing it. Understand
Hmm.
is being done to set them up for success. Is that fair?
Yeah. Knowing that you're having a meeting, I would often say, some issue would come up. I would talk to my kid and would say, I think the thing to do is to send an email to this school administrator or this guidance counselor or this teacher. And when my kid needed more support, saying things like, this is what I've written. Are you comfortable with me sharing it with this person? Is there anything you want me to take out or word differently?
Beautiful. Great
Um,
examples of, so I want to just model what this is a great example of how to collaborate with your kid. So
mhm,
you're bringing them into the agenda. You're still showing them how you have these communications, but you're
mhm.
checking in so that they're not out of the loop. They're in the loop and they're able to have input in the communication.
Exactly. And that's what I was doing with one of my kids in middle school and now in high school. I'm writing the email saying, here's what's going on, and CCing my kid in every email so that in the long run, she'll have access to basically a library of emails written about the things that she tends to run into
Yeah.
to
So
draw
she'll have the
from.
history.
She'll have the history.
She'll have her own history. The other thing that I would say is at that stage, once you're moving, so now we're talking about moving from middle school to high school,
Mhm.
they're still involving them. And you may still be writing the emails, you may not be as they move
And it
forward
depends on
in
the
high
kid.
school. It depends on
I
the kid.
mean,
But there's now this kind of paper trail almost to their
mhm.
documentation because
um,
accommodations, we're just talking about accommodations for the minute,
mhm.
is about documentation, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think also clear and open communication so that like the teachers know that I'm not hiding anything. My kid has the email that they can show the school administration if there's a question over, who said what or what has been requested. So
Yeah.
in that way, it can sort of support nonverbal communication. And then a later stage of it is the kid writes the email, but I'm helping the kid compose the email. So it might be like, Mom, like, I need to say something like this, but if I say it that way, it's not going to sound right. Can you give me some alternate language?
Yeah. And here's what I want to say again, this issue of it depends on your kid is so important because, I have a kid
Hmm.
with dyslexia. And so supporting that writing of the email went all the way into their mid-20s. And
Hmm.
actually still sometimes I'll get a text saying, Mom, can you check this language for me? Is this okay for me to send? And that so that I'm in support role. I'm not leading it. I'm
Hmm.
not, but there's a way in which, because there's a language processing issue, they want to make sure they're communicating in a way that really works. So there's this dance. So in going into middle school, there's more collaboration. It's starting off in high school, there's still that collaboration. But
Hmm.
I think what I'm hearing is throughout high school, ideally, we want to start moving more into support where they're more in the lead. And now we're kind of being more supportive, still collaborative, but now it's their agenda. They're the one communicating with the teacher or the school, and we're supporting them in that communication. Is that fair?
So I would say, again, it depends on your kid.
Of course. Right. But I'm looking
So
broad
when the
brush
kid
strokes.
is ready, I mean, hopefully we can get all the kids to that ready to write it themselves with just a little bit of support by the time they're in college. But again, that's going to
Maybe
depend
not.
on the kid, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you were just telling a story about a kid who needed that extra level of support. So it's about collaborating with the kids. The kid knows what level of support is helpful and is okay with asking for that support when they need it.
Yeah.
I mean, I, you know, my college kid will occasionally say, I'm writing an email. This one feels iffy. Can you read it for me? Or can we talk about it so that I can like feel more comfortable sending this email, making sure I said all the things I need to say in a way that's
Yeah.
going to sound reasonably mature.
Yeah. Right. Well, so this is a weird segue, but go with me for a
Mhm.
second. Okay. I have a women's circle that I'm involved with, and we were meeting last night, and one of the women is turning 60. Okay. Weird segue. And
Transition.
a major life transition for her. And she was really struggling with asking this group of women who adore her, and she's the leader of the group, right? Asking them for something she wanted them to do for her on her 60th as part of an observance she's doing. And she was really struggling and she was fumbling around the language. And I finally looked at her and I said, friend, it sounds like there's something you want to ask for. Will you make the ask? Will you ask for what you want? And she took the breath and then she did. And then she came up to me later as we left and she said, thank you so much. It is so hard to ask. And we ended up in this whole conversation about how hard it is to ask for what we need. Right.
Mhm.
And so the reason I'm going there is because I want to remind all of us, it's really hard for we humans, I think, to ask for what we want and what we need. And what you're speaking to, Melanie, is kind of training our kids throughout the process of transitions from one to the next about helping them see the value of the support and the help that they're getting and that they need, and learning how to ask for it without shame. That's really
Mhm.
what I'm hearing underneath all of this. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
It's pretty powerful. So the key to all of these major transitions, yes, there's prep and yes, there's all these conversations and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's really about how do we make it okay to get the help we need without feeling ashamed of it?
How even to ask for the help we need, even if the answer might be no from the other side.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a story to tell about a hard ask like that.
Yeah.
Um, so so one of my kids needs a lighter schedule
Hmm.
because of you know being a complex kiddo with some energy limitations, and we were asking the school for a reduced schedule, and the school said no in a lot of different ways. It took me a long time to get a clear answer on why they said no, because, you know, you can do part time college, you could do part time work.
Yeah.
But apparently there's no part time high school. And the reason I finally came down to is school is concerned if they're not handing out a full size dose of school, they are violating the kids' right to a free and appropriate public education.
Wow.
And and so I actually asked both of my kids what they wanted to make sure I said during the podcast.
Hmm.
And my kid, who would prefer a part-time high school schedule, um, wants more people to advocate for a reduced load as a reasonable accommodation when a full load could drive someone to burnout.
Wow.
Because we don't
That
want to have the kids take a year or two off after high school to recover from their education.
which they really wouldn't have to do if they could pace themselves in high school in a way that worked for them.
Yeah, yeah. But there's also some real, true, hard history of schools trying to say, "Oh, you need too much support. We don't want you here all day," and that's why the rule is biased the way it is.
Wow.
But when those rules were written, they we didn't have the understanding of burnout and energy limiting conditions that we do now.
Yeah. So what a powerful ask. And what I really want to point people to, and we need to start watching our time, but what I want to
Mhm.
point people to is that by being in a conversation, a conscious conversation with your kids over the years around their own self-management and around transition, and I'm going to celebrate that you've done a ton of work to be in these conversations with your kids in a very collaborative way so that they are able to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate is that part of the transition is understanding, and what you're really saying is meet them where they are, right? Support them in
Absolutely.
what they need. And um and then we need to be able to recognize that sometimes what our kids need may not fit into the box that the system is trying to fit them into, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing that my kid who's now in college that we discovered was the system and the culture pushes us as parents to try to get our kids into and send them to the highest prestige, the most statusy institution that we can borrow our way into.
Right. Yeah.
And something that's been a really key to my college kids' smooth transition is to get over that and like really look at the education as a system, to look at, let's go visit different kinds of colleges and see, public versus private, in-state, out-of-state, little, medium, large, urban, rural, research oriented, teaching oriented, and then make a choice based around what kind of learning and education and campus culture
You want to
do
have.
I want, and what feels really manageable, affordable, that if that we're making space for failure. There's such a common story in this community of the kid who drops out halfway through the first semester or three quarters
Right.
through the first year, doesn't make it to the end of the education, and comes out with a crippling amount of debt and no credential. And what do we need to do to support our kids moving into college that makes it safe for them to fail?
Yeah. So that they can fail forward to achieve what they do have the
So that
capacity
they can
to. Yeah.
Yeah, so they can try their wings. They're taking on the right amount of risk, not a plunge off a skyscraper amount of risk, but like enough risk that they can feel the thrill of flight
Hmm.
and grow from it.
Isn't that beautiful? Love that.
And so my college kids'
I was going to
message
ask.
was, don't micromanage your kids' homework. She really, really appreciated that I was hands off on homework and schoolwork the entire way. It wasn't my problem that she was doing her homework or not. It was homework and schoolwork was between my kid and the school. My job was to support my kid
Okay. So, and she now in college appreciates that she had that experience.
because she learned how to motivate herself to do her work. She learned how to figure out how to pace her work, how to know when it wasn't going well, how to ask for help when she needed more help. And
Okay.
and so she can be independent with that while other people are for the first time facing, if I don't actually manage myself, I might not do well in my classes.
Right.
Like she only has to learn how to manage her school work at school. She doesn't have to learn how to manage school work.
Right. So here's what I'm hearing. And I think this is so we were talking about the transition from elementary to middle, middle to high school,
Mhm,
now what you're talking about, high school to college or work or whatever.
mhm.
There's so much in that transition that's about managing the life of living
Yes.
independently, that you want to make sure that they've practiced doing the work of their job, which in high school is schoolwork, that they
Mhm.
learned how to do that fairly independently so that by the time they're moving on to the next stage, they're able to start tackling those life skills because they've learned how to do their work of being a student or whatever that is. Is that what I'm kind of hearing?
Exactly. It's fail early. And then as you have those failing forward, like what supports do we need to put in place so that you can succeed? For one kid, it might be a lower workload. Let's give you a workload you can succeed at. And for another kid, it might be a higher level of support so what support do you need to do to break this task down into manageable steps? Or what support do you need to get to figure out that you do better work when you're well rested?
Yeah. All right. So we are way over time, and I know we need to stop. And I want to wrap this. I want to come back and wrap this. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me tell you guys, Melanie is here with multiple hats on. She is a mom. She's a trainer in our community, and she is also a coach who works with adults with ADHD, predominantly professors, right?
Yeah. College faculty.
College faculty.
ADHD.
So you can
or
find
other
out
forms
more.
of neurodivergence.
People with neurodivergence. You can find out more about her at DixonLifeCoaching.com. We'll have that in the show notes. They do group and private coaching. Big fans of Dixon, and we have a great working relationship with them. And it has been wonderful that Melanie has had our training and their training, and then has integrated it in this beautiful way. So it's been really fun to see. So we're going to wrap this conversation, and I want to set up a spike a little bit, because we've talked about these different transition points, and I want to ask you, as you wrap, kind of what do we need to say to parents that we haven't said or that you want to highlight? I want to start with the question: what's the message you want to share with parents of middle or predominantly high school kids who are still really attending to the work and trying to kind of drag the kids through the individual assignments because they're afraid they'll not going to be able to do it, or they'll fail, or they'll set back, or they're not going to graduate, or whatever? What's the message that you want to share with those parents?
Well, I'm just going to quote you, Elaine. Focus on the relationship and supporting that. And if you're not in a place where you can focus on the relationship, then work on yourself so that you are in a place where you can focus on the relationship.
All right. I can't argue with those words, but I love that that's how you interpret it, right? So focus on the relationship. If you aren't there, then you've got your work to do to get there, because there's nothing more foundational, right?
Yeah. Don't sacrifice the relationship on the altar of school.
Yeah.
And if, when is it ever going to be safer to fail forward than this school year, this week?
Yeah. And for those of you listening, I know that for some of you, this feels like a really hard thing to hear, right? It is, because we don't ever want our kids to fail. And we want them to practice living and taking on responsibility while they're still under our care and support and under our wings,
And practicing how to respond emotionally when things don't turn out the way you want, which is all failure is, after all.
Yeah.
I mean, practice it when they can do it at home and not when they're, 50, 100, 1,000, 2,000 miles away.
Right. Anything else you want to wrap with today? Any other things you want to share?
One of my kids insisted that I have to call out how amazing our family dog is. And just as a constant source of outside regulation, support in transitions, snuggles at bedtime, and just general source of cuteness and positive conversations.
Beautiful. Total respect. All about the family dog. Ned Hallowell recommends everybody get a dog. I'm not sure everybody should get a dog, but I'm right there with you.
It's a big care commitment, so you have to be ready. But it has been worth the work for the love the dogs brought into our house. Rescue dog.
Yeah, me too. I'm with you. Beautiful. All right, my friend. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your engagement. Do you have a final quote or motto you want to share?
Well, if I'm not quoting you, Elaine, I guess I would have to quote Ross Greene: "Kids do well if they can."
Yeah.
And what we can do as their parents is find the ways to help them show up doing well.
Yeah.
However they can.
Yeah.
And that's going to be wherever they are. Like, back to quoting you, Elaine, we have to meet them where they are, and we have to be ready to see them where they are.
Yeah. And sometimes they're going to resist that. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes we're going to resist that.
Right.
Like, we're going to want to say, oh, well, of course you can do this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have to be willing to listen to the kid who shows us that they're not ready for whatever reason.
Yeah. That's a beautiful insight and a great place to end this conversation, is that I think a lot of this conversation has been about helping them show us when they are ready or what they're ready for. And the converse of it is that, and we also have to be willing to let them tell us.
We have to not be scared of what the truth is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And that might mean, they might be bouncing back, and, that's true. We have to be okay with it. And they might be bouncing forward, and we have to be willing and happy and ready to let them say goodbye.
Yeah. And again, I want to say, and it's not easy as someone, it's bounced all over the place. There are times where it's like, I thought we were through this.
I think
here we are again. And then we have
parenting is the biggest personal growth journey we can go on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fair.
I mean, done right, parenting is the biggest personal growth journey we can go on.
Fair enough. Well, I love being on the journey with you. Thank you for sharing your story with our community.
No, thanks for inviting me too. It's always a delight to spend time with you.
Yeah, indeed. And to those of you listening, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for doing what you're doing and engaging for yourself and for your kids. It makes such an enormous difference. Take a moment and ask yourself, what's the insight you're taking away from this conversation that Melanie and I have been having? We've talked a lot about transition from all different forms. We've talked about cultivating their autonomy, their agency, involving them in their own decision-making. What's your insight or your awareness from this conversation that you want to take forward with you into the week? And again, as always, thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next conversation. Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.